Hey there. I'm Denise Lafreboise. I'm a local mortgage broker, and I have Julie Gill with me today.
Good
So
morning.
thanks for joining me, nice and early,
I know it is early for me. 9:30 is early for me.
right? I feel like 9:30 is always half the day because I've already got kids up, and I feel like this is exhaustion time.
The joys of having older kids. I'm up first, like they're sleeping wherever they are. Sure of it.
Amazing. I want to chat a little bit about what you do. You're a mediator, and I feel like that is probably a job that nobody knows anything about at all. Do you want to tell us a little bit about like what a mediator does?
Yeah, I think mediation is like the best kept secret. So unless somebody's used a mediator, nobody really knows what we do, which is great, kind of hide in the background, which is probably where we should be. So I'm basically a family mediator. So most of my work is in family, which kind of stems from separation, divorce, right through to elder wills and estates, right? So kind of anything that happens within the family, any kind of chaos, I can be there to help. So most of the time it's bringing the parties together so they're making decisions. They're having kind of balanced conversations. I can ask questions and make sure I kind of guide them through a process that more often than not keeps them out of court. So we can be used when people are in court as well and they're litigating issues, but most of the time people will come to me because they want to avoid that area, right? And they said, look, even though we're not getting along, it's really hard to talk. I think we can do this, right? I think with somebody's help, because it's like, there's one thing about having arguments in your home, right? When nobody's around to see your behavior. And then there's another one having those difficult conversations in front of somebody, right? People act differently and you can guide them and go, wait a second, So it's kind of getting them from the point where they're stuck in conflict or they can't make decisions or can't have good conversations to the end where they've made some decisions and, hopefully they can talk at the end.
Well, and I see this a lot with people who are separating, right? Like say you're separating and it's amicable, you weren't the right partner and you're just going your separate ways, and they'll say things like, oh, we're just going to do this ourselves, we're just going to like Google an agreement, we're just going to do that. And I'm sure you see a lot of that, and what we see is like how many things they miss that they forget about discussing. So maybe you can share a little bit of like, what are those things that they're like, oh, we didn't know we had to talk about that, or we didn't know we should divide that.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. Right. So specifically the people that are coming to you and there's a house transaction involved, they only kind of think about the house. They think everything's very siloed. So we're going to deal with the house and we're just going to split it this way. Right. Most of the time it's 50-50, but there's other things that people don't think about. Right. So one of the things with deciding to split 50-50 is, do you know that there's a date of marriage exclusion for the house? Let's say one person owned a property right before they got married, and that's not the one that they're in when they're separating. Did you know you can get a credit for that stuff, right? If you actually looked at the bills, because we've seen, especially close to the end of a relationship, somebody has overspent or said, I bought a new car, I did this, or I borrowed $10,000 out of the line of credit, secured line of credit, I'll pay it back when we deal with the house. Yeah. And people forget about those things, right? So just dealing with it in a silo, they forget about things like that. And then they don't think about funding, right? How are they going to fund their new home? Yeah. They've been silent on support. They're like, they only dealt with the house. Nobody's talked about child support. Nobody's talked about spousal support. And, the equalization of net family property, the fun stuff that we talked about as mediators.
Even pensions and things, right? Like there's other things in play, right?
And that's that whole equalization piece is every other asset. Have you dealt with the cars? Have you dealt with the pensions, the RSPs? And people are like, no.
Yeah. And then they come to us and they're like, we've decided I'm going to buy out my spouse. I'm going to keep the house. I'm like, well, have you decided about separation? Or have you decided about support? And they're like, yeah, not yet. Well, so how is a bank going to give you money if you might owe an extra $1,000 a month next month? Yeah. Like we can't do a stress test unless you have decided what these payments look like.
Yeah. Or how are you going to pay for it? So even if let's say you've decided that child or spousal is coming to you, right? You're on the receiving end and you get $1,000 a month. What happens if that $1,000 doesn't come in, right? I mean, it's guaranteed as long as that person is working and earning income to give you that money, but things happen. COVID happened. Yeah. A lot of income got decreased, right? And can you still carry that on your own, right? And it's that I'm going to buy out my spouse. It's such an emotional decision. Logic is kind of over here and I want it for my children. It's their house, right? There's all that stuff that's tied to it. Like this was our family home. My hopes and dreams are in this home. The kids and people, and I did it myself during my divorce. I was like, this house we bought for the kids. I'm keeping it for the kids. They were 3 and 5.
Yeah, they don't care.
If they had a playroom, they were happy. I could move the playroom anywhere and they'd be like, oh, okay, there's my playroom.
Yeah.
But I had attached so much more to the house and wanting to keep the house, right? And, there's affording it and there's being house poor.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not a good place to be. I think we've all been there for a period of time, but it's not fun.
Yeah. Well, and on our end, we see that too, where it's like, maybe you want to qualify for like buying out your spouse, but maybe we need extra money set aside as like a savings plan to make sure that we have those payments just in case like the support doesn't happen, or like just a cushion. I mean, even when you're going from owning a house with 2 people to owning a house with 1 person, you're paying that whole furnace bill now on your own.
Yeah.
Like you're like, all of this stuff then falls on you. And sometimes people forget that, like you're paying 100% of the bills on 1 salary now instead of 2.
Yeah. And at least, as part of any separation, you have to do full financial disclosure, right? So even if it's mediation, we still do full financial disclosure. And part of that is a budget. So people really don't like to do budgets. I love numbers and I love budgets. People don't like them. I'm like, what happens here? Right.
Yeah.
And even just being able to have the conversation with somebody like, do you have credit in your own name? There's lots of people that it was either just joint or one party had it because they made most of the income. And you think, well, what happens if something goes wrong with the house? How are you going to afford that? Or what happens if something goes wrong with your car? Do you have any available credit to get you through any tough periods?
Yeah.
And they just don't think about the big picture, right?
Yeah. I love that you ask these questions, especially like when you're dealing with self-employed people. Like I find, I love your face.
I'm so sorry. Did I roll my eyes?
No, but I think a lot of self-employed people, they're like, I make this much, but they don't actually know, like, or they're factoring gross. Sometimes they're looking at net. Sometimes they're thinking about what they T4 themselves out of a company. Like all of these things make a difference when you're looking at dividing assets, right?
Yeah, and self-employed are fascinating, right? Because the person that has the self-employed income, it's always much, much less, right? Oh, I don't make anything by the time you're separating. And the other person's like, they were millionaires. They've always paid for everything. How on earth, now that I look at the financials, how could they only make $50,000 a year?
Yeah.
Right. But the interesting thing is, people, if you've been through this, people will talk about kind of the line 150 income, right? And line 150 income for self-employed is not necessarily, your income as self-employed is not necessarily your income for child and spousal support, right? Yeah. They are not necessarily one and the same. And that's an important distinction, right? If I can write everything off, but my partner has to pay for everything, after tax income, apples and oranges.
Yeah. Yeah. And they don't get it, right?
No.
The other interesting thing we were talking about is just about with the courts being so backed up, we've seen such a trend towards, more people trying to do it on their own, just because even if you plan to go that route, it still takes so long to get there, right?
Yeah, it used to be much more of a threat. Fine, we'll go to court. If you don't, it's kind of a bully tactic, right? If you don't agree with this, we'll go to court. Good luck, right? Good luck trying to get into court right now. So for the longest period during COVID, they were only seeing urgent matters. And I have been through separation. I know how many, like most things are urgent to you when you're living in a day-to-day. It's not for the courts, right? Like it's got to be really serious to be an urgent matter. And at least now it's opening up a bit. But there's dates into the new year to start the process, right? And if you've been through it, it's a long, slow process. You're not getting in front of a judge your first appearance and everything's getting settled, right? So there are more people now coming to mediation and arbitration who say, we need this settled. Like we just have to move forward with our lives. Right. If you think of somebody that at the beginning of COVID was just starting to think about separating, right, and talking about it, and was waiting to get into court, and what even has happened in the housing market.
Yeah, then they're waiting to get their down payment from their house, because you can't get that down payment unless you've agreed who gets what money. And then you've seen the housing market go up and up and up while you wait. You very well could be priced out, right?
Yeah, and things people don't know, they kind of like, well, we've agreed to something, and they forget what the lenders want, right? Like they want that document, and is a kitchen table agreement, which is literally, some people sitting down at the kitchen table and going, I'll swap you this pen for that one. Like, what would you like? Some lenders may, you can tell me some lenders, but I don't know very many that will
it's some one of those things, right? Like the gold standard is always going to be like, sign documentation appropriately. And then
Yeah.
beyond that, it depends. Like we will see some, if it's a less complicated situation. So maybe you don't own property, there's no children involved. Like
Yeah.
it's a pretty simple, you go your way, I go my way. We both take out what we came in.
Yeah.
That's a little easier. When the more complicated the situation is, the more like relevant documentation they're going to want, because
Yeah.
things could change. Right.
Yeah.
You're asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars of a lender's money, and you can't prove that your financial situation is not going to change in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. What like a terrifying position to be in. And it's one of, there's so much, it's so overwhelming, all the things that you need to think about. Right. So it's making informed decisions and working with professionals that work in this area. Right. There's got to be brokers that don't know what to look for in the proper documentation for a separation. Well, they've decided on the house. Yeah. Okay, but did they do everything else? Right? Like you've got to look at it as a whole. I've seen people say, we didn't tell the real estate lawyer that we were separating. We just got them to put it into we kept our joint account open, and it just got split 50-50. And then I'm with them 6 months, a year later, when they have the time to do this, to find out, there was an equalization payment owing from one to the other, and the only asset was the house they already split.
Yeah, no, they can't get it.
How are you going to get that?
Right. Or the opposite, right? Where yes, let's like not say anything to the real estate lawyer, and let's just like sell our house. And then the other person all of a sudden doesn't agree to that anymore. And they show up to the lawyers and say, actually, we're separating. Well, now your down payment and deposit money is stuck in that trust account until you've decided who gets what, right?
Yeah, because a real estate lawyer, if they've done their due diligence, is not just going to hand you a bunch of money, right? They should be like, do you know what you're doing with this? And usually you kind of figure out, most people that are in the middle of a separation, something's come out in some conversation somewhere. Right. But that money gets held in trust, which is brilliant when you've just bought a house and you're trying to close, or you don't have any documentation again for your new funding, right? You've walked into a bank and they've said, sure, if you've got a couple $100,000 and you've got good credit, I'm sure you'll be approved. And they went, great, off I go.
Yeah. You do an online like mortgage calculator, and then they're like, okay, I can qualify for 600,000. You go buy something. Then you're like, okay, so, where's your documentation? Where's your separation agreement? Do you have support payments? Like all these things. Oh, the app didn't ask me that.
Yeah. And we have that, some partners can't come off. They just can't come off title or mortgage. Right. Because even though they like the other one to buy them out, and they're totally okay with that, and that makes sense in their scenario, they just can't, because the higher income earner just, they can't come off title and mortgage because the other person just can't afford it yet. Yeah. Right. So do we have to get creative and say, okay, one's going to stay on for 3 to 5 years? Does that impact the other one if they're trying to buy, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we have like 58 different lenders, but we do all kinds of weird creative stuff, right? Because there's times where we need to just pull out extra money and say, this is our cushion until we go back to work, but so that you can get that other person off title. Like if you've decided to separate, like doing that as soon as possible is always best, right? Like you don't want to stay on a house for 3 years or 5 years and then something changes, right? Then there's somebody new in the picture or whatever's happening. It's not good. But we have lenders who will give mortgages based on solely support income, provided you can show that it's been being paid, right? If they're missing payments, that's a different problem.
Or if they haven't started yet, right? But people I'll have a document saying I'm going to get child and spousal, and our normal scenario is when the house closes, right? When the house is transferred. But often they need to prove that support prior to that.
Yeah. And I think the other thing people don't understand too is sometimes you can pull the equalization money out of the house, right? So if I'm the one leaving, my husband can pull money out of the house to pay me to go, right? Like you don't have to just come up with this cash to pay the other person, right?
Yeah, we can get totally creative. And there's lots of people that, will say, I'll keep my pension, you can have the house. And sometimes that's a good deal, but even another set of eyes, even if you're doing a kitchen table agreement, another set of eyes to say, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about this? Or I can't afford it, or I could never do that. And I said, well, would you be interested if you could? And they often say yes. And I said, well, let's run the numbers just in case, right? Maybe there's something you're missing. Are you not thinking about now that, the Canada Child Benefit will change now that it's not household income and just sole income, right? If you add the support and you add your income and we offset equalization with a buyout, are we closer?
Yeah.
to something that you would want, right?
Yeah. Well, and even just like forcing them to actually look at things. Because I do find like the kitchen table agreements, I assume would be based on when I have that first conversation with someone and they say, yeah, we owe about this much on credit cards and we owe whatever. And then when we pull credit and we're like, actually, it's this number. Like, I think we tend to, numbers are whatever they were when we looked at them last. And
Yeah.
it's not always accurate. And especially in the case of separation, because I know a lot of people are told, you know what, like just don't pay off any bills, decide them later, decide them during this process. And then they're taking their credit in the meantime.
Yeah. Or that belief that we've always kept our finances separate and they'll stay separate, right? Not how the law sees it. I'm not giving legal advice, just providing legal information. It's not how the law sees it, right? So you may think you both have similar assets, but one party is, $100,000 in debt that you didn't know about. That can affect your equalization and any money you're planning on for your future, right? So you don't want that to be a surprise after you've bought a new house.
And the other one we see is like, no, we don't need to separate because we're not legally married, right? We're just common law. Well, I'm not sure that's really how that's looked at either.
Yeah, again, it's kind of those, I say beliefs, but maybe it's those myths that have just been progressively, getting more and more ingrained in society. Common law status legally is not the same as marital status, right? And there's no automatic equalization. There's no automatic 50-50 sharing of things. If it's in my name, it is mine at separation. We're not divorcing, it's separation. I'm covered under different law. Right? You can make claims that say, I have some interest in that property, but people think, and it is scary because you've seen people like in 20, 30-year relationships, common law, we're never on title. We're never on title for that house. And it's much harder to get unless the other party agrees, right? So mediation is really good for that because we get to be creative and have some of those emotional and, difficult conversations that wouldn't happen in the courthouse.
Yeah.
Right? It's dealing with logic in the law versus the emotions and kind of the history of the relationship. Doesn't happen if you're going to court. Right. It's not relevant.
And then, so separating people is somebody you deal with a lot, but what about at the other end of our housing transaction too, right? Like dealing with elderly people.
Yeah, we've got seniors that are maybe downsizing or moving in with moving into care facility or moving in with family members and kind of everything that goes around that. There is sadly a lot of elder financial abuse. There's a lot of elder abuse, period, but a lot of elder financial abuse. Some of it, oddly, comes from a good place of trying to help my parents, I'm trying to help mom manage her finances and that, but it's not in a way that's including mom in any of the decisions, right? Or it's wills and estates, right? Like we've got this house, it's shared between the four of us. One of us, one of the kids wants to buy out the property from the other children. We can't agree who's going to carry the cost until we sell mom or dad's house. Right. So there's so many wills and estate disputes that are really all family, right? They look differently in the law, but they're all family conflict at the end of the day.
Well, and I think those ones are going to get more complicated because of the number of parents we see needing to co-sign or needing to put a line of credit to give their kids to help, like they're helping their kids get into a home, like into the housing market, because a lot of first-time buyers just need parents' help anymore in the GTA. But depending on how they've helped and have they helped all their kids equally, like when you start looking at those things, we've often had conversations where people are like, no problem, my parents can co-sign for me. And you start talking to the parents and they have a lot of debt and they can't co-sign, or they already co-signed for your sister and didn't tell you. Like, and so I think sometimes like those conversations just need to be had. And having somebody to ask the right questions is really key.
Yeah, because if it doesn't get resolved at the time, it will come up later as an estate issue, right? Well, you've already got your inheritance. I know we're splitting it 3 ways. You've already got yours. Just keep that, right? Or the co-signing piece is interesting because it comes up all the time. Even if it wasn't an official co-sign, it was gifting money. Oh my goodness, family gifting money to a couple. Is it a gift? Is it a loan? If something happens, is it expected to be paid back? And no documentation. It's like, well, you knew mom and dad gave it to us. And if we're separating, we should pay mom and dad back, right? You have a lot of these, we have a lot of these conversations and you kind of get okay, what legally the right thing, what legally do you have to do? What are your obligations? And what's the kind of right moral, ethical thing to do, right? You may not want to give it to your ex, but are you comfortable giving it to your ex-in-laws? Like, if you know you owe them some of this money, can we make that check payable to them? And those are things we can do if you've planned ahead of time. The real estate lawyer will do those disbursements, right? They'll make sure the money gets to your ex-in-laws versus your ex. Yes, they can turn around and give it back to them, but at least you've paid your debt and there's proof you've paid that debt.
Yes. This is why we like these things to go through the real estate lawyer, right? Even the payouts, if you're doing a spousal buyout, like that money isn't, you're not handing it to somebody, it is going through a lawyer and documented that they've given it to you.
Yeah. And I love, you don't know, and I see this so often, and I probably said it already this morning, you don't know what you don't know. So when I hear we're avoiding lawyers and they'll come to mediation, I go, great. And then I'm like, okay, well, who's the real estate lawyer you're using? And they went, oh no, we told you we're not using lawyers. I'm like, you can't sell your house or transfer title without a real estate lawyer. They're like, is that different?
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Well, and it's often the case that it's like, I'm afraid of whatever. I'm afraid of all lawyers. I'm afraid of all doctors. I'm afraid of all whatever. And then it's like, no, you need different ones for different things. Like,
You hear that so much in family, right? I'm afraid of a lawyer. They're just going to be expensive. It's going to take too long. They're going to start us fighting. We're not fighting now. They're going to start us fighting. And there's some that do, right? It's like every profession. There's also really good, really empathetic, caring family lawyers, right? That if you work with mediators or, you work with people that like you that know about separation, we've got those contacts.
Yeah. Well, right? And I always think like, how brilliant is it for you to even use both? Like, instead of, if you're afraid of going the other route because it might be too expensive, well, here, let's work with a mediator and let's iron out all these details so that we can go and say, here's what we want to do. Just write the paper for us. Right.
Yeah. It's kind of that in-between piece, right? So it'll be people that don't want to do a kitchen table agreement or don't necessarily trust their ex. So they understand that they don't know what they don't know and they don't want to miss something. They'll come to mediation. Or the other side is the ones that really want to avoid lawyers. My best case scenario is you're going to work with a mediator. We're going to fill in all the gaps. We're going to answer all the questions. You're going to do the financial disclosure. And then you're going to take it to a lawyer to have it drafted into a legally binding separation agreement. But lots of people don't, right? Yeah. The reality is when I create a memo of understanding or an MOU, which is what a mediator can create, people turn it into their own domestic contracts. They use those. We know they use those. Right?
And we see those like 20 years later that they're still not like with the separation agreement because like we did this and we agreed upon it and we just moved forward and and in a lot of cases that's enough.
Yeah, but it is working with the right mediator. Like, I will say, started this in 2009. I'm a certified divorce financial analyst. I have more accreditations than I know what to do with. It's important, right, that you know the person you're working with, right? If they just do parenting plans, that's great if that's what you have. Yeah. Right. If you're trying to deal with your finances, you don't just want a mediator that works with parenting plans. Right. You need to find the professional that has the right skill set and the right fit. Right. It's like a mortgage broker. Like, people share a lot of information with us.
They do.
You hear everything, whether it's got anything to do with what we're working on with them, and they need to trust us. Right. It's got to be a good fit. It can't be, it can't be somebody you're afraid to talk to or ask a question to. It doesn't work.
Well, and I was perusing on Facebook this morning and I was going through, and like you said, working with the right person. Here's this story of somebody whose bridge financing is completely falling apart because they were working with a mortgage broker who doesn't know enough about separation, right? And they didn't know what to do. They're stuck now. Well, because you have two people on one house and one person on the other house, and we can't necessarily bridge finance with all lenders. Sometimes we can, and your spouse is going to have to sign to say they're okay with it. They're not buying another house because you're using their down payment money to secure this house for those 4 days or whatever. But it's just working with people who are going to ask the right questions, go to the right lenders. Like, yes, we have 58 lenders. They're not all who I go to for separated people. Yeah. Right. And knowing who's going to like what documentation. Some of them are quite happy with a memo of understanding. Some of them want to see fully executed separation agreements, and just knowing kind of where we need to go to have the best fit for the clients to move forward.
Yeah. And that's the timing, right, of when people should get in touch. right? I'm like earlier, as early as
Yeah.
possible, not when we've made all the decisions, then we'll come and talk to people. Well, it's too late. Because I have people like, I'm going to buy this person out of the house and here's the amount and we're going to do this. And I'm like, have you talked to a broker? Can you get funding for this? Like, I appreciate
Yeah.
that's what you guys have figured this out, but is this something that's doable? And then
Yeah.
we find out months later, like it's not doable. And they've spent the money and the time writing up agreements, and getting their hopes up. And it was never possible because they just didn't reach out early enough. Right.
Yeah, and I see both sides of it, right? We see the people that, never thought that, oh, maybe they would need to get pre-approved because they've just always been approved. They own a house. Like, why would a bank say no? And then we see the other people who are talking to us 2 or 3 years ahead. Hey, so what does this look like? How much support should I get? What type of equalization will we be looking at out of the house if I were to leave, or what, like planning ahead. Just to know, even if they're going to put themselves in a really tight spot, or what to ask for.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of those difficult conversations over the last 2 years, right? People that have been wanting to separate and just financially can't, they're not in a position, right?
Mhm.
And the market, like, how are you going to sell one house and buy 2 more?
Yeah.
Right. Great. You keep the house, but how is the other parent who really wants to do shared parenting and kind of 50-50 and be in their kids' lives? Can you both live in the catchment area for the school? Can you both live
with
relatively close to
no
each other?
rental, like no rentals available, and no, like,
We're bidding wars on
so
rentals
hard.
right now. Like,
Yeah, it's sometimes harder to get a rental than it is a house actually right now.
yeah. So there's more of that kind of people separating in their own home, right? And finishing the basement and making sure they've kind of both got some privacy and figuring that out, and how they pay bills. And they're almost like trial separations.
Yeah.
But we're creating them more like marriage contracts, right? We're saying, like, this is how we're going to split things. Should we separate? Or we've kind of agreed to separate, but we need an interim plan to get through now.
Yeah. Well, I always tease my husband because we have like a legal 2-bedroom basement apartment. I was like, if we ever separate, that's where you live. Like, there you go. There's your own space, your own exit. It'll be great. We'll just send the kids downstairs or send them up.
Yeah. And there's lots of parents that do that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, seriously do that. And there's been more and more during COVID, which I get it. But even then, mediation is great. Like, how do you have those conversations? Can you have people over? What does that look like? What happens if you don't come home at night? Well, your kids are still living in that house and they can see that stuff.
Right.
How do you pay bills when you feel you're in the basement of your own home? Maybe a really fancy basement. Are you still splitting 50-50? Does that feel fair?
Right.
Nothing to do with legal, right? Does that feel fair to you guys?
Oh, and it's not fair. That's me just teasing him, but
yeah. No, but there's lots of people that do that, right? But I mean, if you don't have those conversations, you're going to build up resentment. So by the time you have to do something, it's going to
then it's worse, right? Yeah. And honestly, there's just so many people separating these days too, because I think, with COVID, we're stuck in a house with somebody maybe we never really liked that much, or it wasn't a good fit, right?
Yeah. Or even just the stress of, the kids that were being
there's stress. I've homeschooling your kids and maybe job impacts and all that. Yeah, I can't, right? Like, I feel like we're fairly sane people, and I'm not sure how we made it through that. Like, 3 kids homeschooling, terrible.
Yeah. Thank God. We only had one that was finishing up university, which was really hard for him. But I can't imagine. I can't tell you how many meetings I've had with people out in the driveway, in their vehicles in the driveway, in their vehicles at a park, sitting on a park bench, right? I've done backyard mediations. Couldn't go into homes, couldn't get into offices, and these people needed help, right? Well, let's sit in the backyard if we can be spaced. Like, the cool thing about mediation, and to a greater extent mediation and somewhat to arbitration, is we can get really creative. We can build the process around what people need and kind of get them to where we need. Right? It's not a matter of, yes, there's a framework for the law. The law says you can do this. But other than kind of child support and knowing if you have kids, you have to have a parenting plan, the rest is making informed decisions, right? Do your equalization payment. It does not mean that has to be the number you agree to. Or that there's a proper way to do it. And it has to be pension, or it has to be house. It has to be, you split all the RSPs and TFSAs right down the middle. You can get really creative.
Yeah. And that's what I like about what you do, is like, it's the whole goal is like, let's go together. How do we move forward? What does this look like together? It's not that typical, like, when people think of separation or divorce, they think about fighting each other. And it's not the case, right? Like, you gotta, especially with kids though, right? Like, you gotta figure out how you're going forward together, right?
You do, and those are the ideal clients that I honestly don't see a ton. I do. I mean, I love those ones. Or when I get to work on cohab agreements or prenups, or I love that. Like that is just so fun to have people that just really love each other sitting and
Yeah.
talking about some things. But I get that, we couldn't talk before, or we couldn't talk during our relationship. What makes us, what makes you think we can do this now? Like, because it really is a better alternative, right? And you've got to kind of figure out how to go forward. If a judge decides how things are going to get split or what's going to happen with your kids, are you really going to accept that and move forward? Or are you going to keep going back to court to get a judge to make another decision when you don't agree with the other party, right? My job is literally to get people talking.
Yeah.
Whether you didn't talk when you first came to me, doesn't matter, right? Your kids think you're superheroes. You got to kind of play that up. You owe it to them to at least try and figure out if you can do something together for them, right? Before going to a third party for decision making.
That's awesome.
That's my personal bias.
So, and where do you help people, like across Ontario? Like where do you work, or who can you help?
So, I mean, the great thing about COVID has been my business is now 100% on Zoom. Not 100, 99. I can still use backyard mediations or go into lawyers' offices when needed. But it's across Ontario. I mean, really for the arbitration side is Ontario. Mediation, I can really do anywhere. It's a matter of partnering up with the right lawyer to make sure I know what the laws are in certain provinces or states or wherever I'm working. But on the elder side, I'm an international. I'm one of, I think now 11 people in Canada with an advanced elder mediation degree, certification, and I'm an international.
Amazing.
An international designation for that. So on the elder mediation side, I can work anywhere.
That's
which is
awesome.
Great.
And how do people find you? Website?
Word, yes. That is basically it. It's mostly referrals, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, to get more information, it is absolutely just Googling Families First Mediation or Julie Gill and calling the office, right? So even if it's a mortgage broker, if you've got a question, if you've got a case that you're not sure what to do with, or file you're not sure what to do, give the office a call, right? If it's just a quick question about what do I need, or what should I tell my clients about this, give us a call. Like we're here to help, not just clients, right? Like there's a lot of professionals that can use some information if they don't face this stuff a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. There's so much we can learn from each other, right? It's so good.
Yeah, we need the network, right? Like I can't work in a vacuum, right? I need people that are contractors, and I need mortgage brokers, and I need real estate lawyers, and I need family lawyers. I need access to all these people, and I need to build those relationships because that's what my clients need.
Yeah.
Right.
But I always think that mediation is a really great place to start. Like, even if that's not where they end up, when people come and they're like, we're thinking about this, we're not sure, just to start and be like, okay, let's look at the financials and let's figure out all the things you need to consider.
Yeah. I mean, most of us don't take retainers, right? You're just paying for the hours that you're working with us. And you always have lawyers and court and arbitration. You always have all those other options to fall back on. I don't know why people wouldn't give it a shot, especially with the way the courts are right now. Isn't it worth it, spend a couple of hours and see if you can resolve some things? Bring your lawyers to the table. I'm open, like whatever works for you, I'm willing to try and figure out. Right? A way to make it work. I went through, full disclosure, I went through the courts. My ex was kind of hell-bent on going to court and being heard by a judge. And it was a disaster.
Yeah. It
was a disaster. And that's why I do what I do now. 18 years ago was not 19 years ago. It wasn't pretty. And I had a 3 and a 5-year-old.
Right? Yeah, but I think that's great about you too, right? Just that you can say to people, look, I've been there. I understand this. I know where you're at, but let's put our emotions aside and move forward. Right?
Yeah, we'd love to, but they're just so ingrained. It's more giving them a safe place to let those emotions out, because they're going to come out one way or another.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm like, keep him at this table, great. Like, don't bring it home and have this conversation. If you've got a difficult conversation, let's have it here. Make sure the kids aren't around. Say what you got to say, because this is your last chance to say what you have to say. Ask for that apology, ask for the proof, ask for whatever it is you need. You may not get it, but it should be a safe place to ask for stuff and talk about things. So there is, we could go through a 2-hour meeting, and sometimes we would spend an hour talking about the actual issues that they need to have documented. And the other hour is just stuff they needed to get off their chest. Right. In order to make better decisions or figure out, okay, maybe you're not the horrible person that I thought, or maybe we can do this.
Yeah. And I guess like when you're arguing at home, it's different than sitting at a table and being heard, having a third party there to like validate that you've been heard, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And try and get you the responses when you need, or a reason why you're not going to get a response.
Mhm.
They're difficult conversations. Even I have couples that sit holding hands and crying together. No, they're mutual in their agreement that this relationship is not going any further, and it's still a hard thing to do.
I don't know
Right.
how you do what you do. You're amazing. I'm so glad you're here to help these people because I don't think I can do that.
Yeah, but you are helping them, right? Without their funding, what are they doing on their housing transactions, right? Like,
Yeah.
we all play a role in making this successful for couples and families, right? And we each have to know where our skill sets are and where we add value, and really work with the clients where they are. And I think, again, that's why you're good at what you do, right? They need all of us.
No, well, thank
Right.
you. Well, I thank you for joining me today, and thank you for
Thank you.
sharing that. And if people need you, they can reach out to it's familyfirstmediation.ca.
Famiesfirstmediation.com.
.com. Okay.
Yes.
Or you can just find Julie Gill. You can find her everywhere.
You can find me. You can
You're
always.
pretty
find
easy to
me.
Google.
I am.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thanks. You too. Bye.